Imagine that the most sacred story you inherited before you were old enough to question anything was not delivered to humanity in a single, untouched form. Imagine that it passed through generations of fear, political pressure, cultural adaptation, theological conflict, and institutional ambition before finally reaching you as unquestionable truth. Picture the familiar scene. A quiet night in Bethlehem, a star burning above the darkness, a virgin mother holding a miraculous child, shepherds kneeling, angels singing, wise men following a light across the desert. For centuries, this image has represented innocence, divine intervention, and the beginning of salvation. It has appeared in churches, paintings, songs, family homes, and the earliest memories of children. But what happens when we stop looking at the image and begin examining the texts beneath it? What happens when we place the accounts beside one another and ask a question most believers were trained to avoid? Was the story always there, or did it emerge gradually as the meaning of Jesus changed across history? To enter this question, return to the winter of 1670. In a modest, cold room in The Hague, Baruch Spinoza sits beneath the trembling light of a candle. He is 38 years old. He has already been cut off from the religious community that raised him. He lives without wealth, official position, or institutional protection. By day, he grinds lenses. His hands polish glass for microscopes and telescopes, instruments designed to extend the limits of human sight. Through these lenses, scientists can observe worlds hidden from ordinary vision, distant stars, invisible structures, forms of life too small for the naked eye. But at night, Spinoza turns toward another object, obscured by centuries of interpretation: the Bible. He does not approach it as a magical book that fell complete from heaven. He approaches it as a historical collection composed by human beings who lived in specific societies, spoke particular languages, faced political dangers, and wrote for communities with changing needs. This approach was revolutionary because it removed Scripture from the realm of unquestionable mystery and placed it within history. Spinoza asked questions that now seem ordinary, but were once dangerous. Who wrote these texts? When were they written? Were they written by the people whose names appear on them? Do their narratives agree? Does the language of one section resemble another? Do later passages reflect political or theological ideas absent from earlier ones? What happens when religious authority depends upon people never asking such questions? Spinoza was not satisfied with devotional explanations created to protect a conclusion already accepted. He wanted to examine the structure of the argument itself, and the first crack appeared at the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew opens with a genealogy. To many readers, this appears to be nothing more than a long and repetitive list of ancient names. But within the Jewish world, genealogy established far more than family history. It established identity, inheritance, legitimacy, and political expectation. The Messiah was expected to emerge from the line of King David. Therefore, anyone claiming that Jesus was the Messiah needed to connect him to Davidic ancestry. Matthew carefully constructs that connection. The line begins with Abraham. It moves through Isaac and Jacob, passes through David, continues through generations of kings and descendants, and finally reaches Joseph. Joseph, the husband of Mary. And here the structure begins to collapse under its own logic. Why prove that Joseph descended from David if Joseph was not the biological father of Jesus? Why devote the opening of the gospel to a bloodline that, according to the virgin birth doctrine, never physically entered the child? A genealogy based upon biological descent has force only if the descent is real. It would be like claiming hereditary ownership of a kingdom by presenting the family history of a man who raised you but did not father you. Social and legal relationships may matter, but the genealogy is clearly designed to demonstrate blood. If Joseph contributed no blood, why does his bloodline matter? Traditional theology offers answers. Some argue that legal fatherhood was sufficient. Others suggest that adoption could transmit royal status. Still others attempt to connect Mary indirectly to David. But Spinoza's method asks a more basic question. What assumption existed when the genealogy was first formed? Perhaps the genealogy belonged to an earlier stage of the tradition, one in which Jesus was regarded as the natural son of Joseph, and therefore biologically connected to David. If so, the genealogy is not an error accidentally left in the text. It is a fossil. It is the surviving trace of an earlier belief preserved beneath a later theological layer. Every old building contains evidence of previous structures. A doorway may remain after a wall is moved. An arch may reveal where another room once stood. A foundation may continue supporting a building radically different from the one originally constructed above it. Texts can preserve the same kind of evidence. A later editor may add explanations, alter emphasis, or place a new theological frame around an older tradition, but traces remain. The genealogy may be one such trace. It points toward a Jesus who belonged fully to human history, born from a mother and a father, connected to a people through ordinary descent, and claimed as Messiah because of that lineage. If this were true, then the virgin birth was not the beginning of the story. It was a later development. That possibility does not merely alter one detail about the nativity. It changes the entire relationship between Jesus and humanity. If Jesus entered the world through the same human process as everyone else, then he was not biologically separated from the human condition. His courage becomes human courage. His suffering becomes human suffering. His insight becomes human insight. His life becomes something to examine and perhaps imitate, not merely worship from an impossible distance. But before drawing such a conclusion, Spinoza needed more than one contradiction. He needed to compare the witnesses. So he placed the four Gospels side by side: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, not as four perfectly harmonized voices, but as separate texts written at different moments for different communities. And what he discovered was not simply a disagreement. It was a silence so profound that once noticed, it becomes impossible to ignore. The Gospel of Mark is widely regarded as the earliest surviving gospel. Its narrative begins abruptly. There is no birth story. There is no Bethlehem. There is no virgin conception. There is no star. There are no wise men. There are no shepherds watching their flocks beneath an open sky. There is no angel visiting Mary. There is no Joseph struggling with the discovery of a mysterious pregnancy. Mark introduces Jesus as an adult. He appears at the Jordan River, where John is baptizing people. The story begins with public action, not miraculous birth. This absence creates a difficult question. If the virgin birth were the central proof that Jesus was divine, why would the earliest gospel omit it? Why would a writer close to the earliest Christian traditions begin only with the adult ministry? The omission does not prove with absolute certainty that the author rejected the idea. Writers leave out events for many reasons. Mark may simply have chosen another beginning, but the significance of the silence increases when we remember how central the virgin birth later became. A detail that eventually defined orthodoxy is absent from the earliest surviving account. That should at least make us hesitate. Then comes John. John is the most philosophically elevated of the four Gospels. It opens not with ancestry but with the Logos, the Word, the rational principle through which existence is ordered. The language is cosmic. The Word was in the beginning. The Word was with God. The Word became flesh. Surely if any gospel were going to emphasize a supernatural conception, it would be John. Yet John also says nothing about a virgin birth. There is no nativity narrative, no angelic announcement, no biological explanation, no journey to Bethlehem, no monger. John's Jesus appears as a cosmic revelation, but the physical mechanism of his birth is left entirely unmentioned. This means that among the four canonical Gospels, only Matthew and Luke contain explicit virgin birth narratives, and even these two accounts do not match. Matthew tells the story largely through Joseph's experience. Joseph learns that Mary is pregnant. He considers ending the relationship quietly. A dream reassures him. Magi arrive from the east after following a star. Herod becomes threatened by the possibility of a rival king. The family flees to Egypt, and the massacre of children becomes part of the narrative. Luke tells a very different story. The attention is placed upon Mary. An angel announces the conception. A census brings the family to Bethlehem. Shepherds receive the heavenly message. The infant is presented at the temple. The family returns without the dramatic escape into Egypt described by Matthew. These differences are often blended together in paintings, films, sermons, and Christmas plays until they appear to form one continuous account. But the familiar nativity scene is actually a combination of elements taken from different narratives. The wise men come from Matthew. The shepherds come from Luke. The star belongs to Matthew. The angelic chorus belongs to Luke. The result is emotionally powerful, but it is not the exact story told by either gospel. Spinoza's method does not require us to ridicule these differences. It requires us to see them. Each gospel serves a theological purpose. Matthew emphasizes fulfillment of Jewish prophecy and the connection between Jesus and Israel's sacred past. Luke presents a universal message filled with compassion for outsiders, the poor, and the socially forgotten. Their birth stories function as theological introductions. They tell the audience who Jesus is before he speaks a single word. But when such introductions differ from one another and are absent from the earliest gospel, another possibility arises. Perhaps the stories were developed to answer later questions. Who was Jesus? Why was he greater than other prophets? How could a crucified Jewish teacher be presented to Greek and Roman audiences? When did his divine status begin? Was he chosen by God at baptism? Was he adopted as God's son after resurrection? Or was he divine from the moment of conception? These questions were not abstract. They shaped how early communities understood authority, salvation, and identity. The farther the movement traveled from Galilee, the more its language changed. A Jewish audience could understand Jesus through prophecy, covenant, and Davidic descent. A Greek-speaking audience might understand him through philosophical concepts such as logos. A Roman audience was familiar with stories of heroes and rulers connected to divine ancestry. Traditions adapt as they move. This does not always happen through deliberate fraud. Human beings interpret events through the symbols available to them. A community attempting to express the importance of a teacher may gradually describe his life in more extraordinary terms. A respected teacher becomes a prophet. A prophet becomes the chosen son of God. The chosen son becomes pre-existent. The pre-existent son becomes eternally divine. Each stage responds to a new theological need. The virgin birth moves divine status backward to the beginning of life. Jesus is not merely selected later. He is different from conception. This development solves one theological problem while creating another. If Jesus is biologically removed from ordinary humanity, can he still fully represent humanity? If he does not share the same origin, limitations, and inherited condition, what does it mean to call him human? Later theologians would spend centuries trying to solve this tension by declaring him fully divine and fully human at the same time. But Spinoza was interested in what preceded the formula. He wanted to know how the formula became necessary. The birth narratives may have functioned as theological bridges. They connected the Jewish messianic tradition with a wider world, already familiar with miraculous conceptions and divine sons. From this perspective, the nativity stories are not simply innocent details. They mark a transition. They show a human teacher being lifted gradually out of ordinary history and placed into a supernatural category. The question is why? Why did early followers need Jesus to become more than human? Why was a man who taught, suffered, and died not enough? The answer cannot be found only in theology. It must be found in politics. Because Jesus did not live in a peaceful spiritual landscape. He lived under occupation. His people were controlled by an empire. His language of kingship, liberation, justice, and kingdom carried political consequences. To understand how a human teacher became a divine figure, we must first understand why his humanity was dangerous. And for that, we must enter the violence of Roman Judea. The world of Jesus was not the silent world of Christmas music. It was a world of soldiers, taxes, public executions, political informants, social unrest, and collective memory. Judea existed beneath Roman power. Foreign rulers controlled the region. Roman authority determined taxation, military force, and political legitimacy. Local leaders remained in power only so long as they cooperated with imperial interests. The population carried the weight of occupation. Farmers struggled under economic pressure. Religious identity became inseparable from political resistance. Different Jewish movements offered different responses. Some sought compromise. Some withdrew from society. Some waited for divine intervention. Some prepared for rebellion. In such an environment, the word Messiah did not refer merely to a gentle teacher offering private comfort. The Messiah was connected to kingship, to David, to restoration, to the hope that Israel would no longer live beneath foreign domination. Not every person expected the same kind of Messiah. Some imagined a priestly figure. Others expected a political ruler. Still others anticipated divine judgment against oppressive powers. But the idea carried danger. A man associated with messianic expectation could attract crowds. Crowds could become movements. Movements could become revolts. Rome understood this pattern and responded with violence. This makes the final days of Jesus politically significant. He entered Jerusalem during a major festival when the city was filled with pilgrims and tension. Crowds welcomed him with symbolic gestures associated with kingship and liberation. Palm branches were not neutral decorations. Public acclamation was not harmless. When people called him Son of David, they were invoking a royal lineage. When they spoke of a coming kingdom, they were speaking inside an occupied territory ruled by another king. Jesus also confronted religious authorities connected to the political structure. He entered the temple, disrupted commercial activity, criticized hypocrisy, and challenged those who claimed spiritual authority while burdening the people. These actions threatened more than religious sensibilities. The temple was also an economic and political center. To challenge it publicly was to disturb an institution upon which order depended. Rome did not crucify people for having private spiritual opinions. Crucifixion was a punishment associated with rebellion, sedition, and resistance. The inscription placed above Jesus, King of the Jews, identified the political nature of the charge. Rome was declaring the fate of anyone who claimed rival kingship. The cross was not merely an instrument of death. It was propaganda. It told the population that Caesar remained king and that alternative kingdoms ended in humiliation. After Jesus was executed, his followers faced an enormous crisis. They had expected transformation. Instead, their leader was publicly defeated. How could the Messiah be crucified? How could the chosen one lose? The movement survived by reinterpreting defeat. The execution became sacrifice. The apparent failure became fulfillment. The death became victory over death. The rejected teacher became the risen Lord. This transformation gave the movement emotional and theological power, but it also began moving Jesus away from his immediate historical context. The more his death became a cosmic event, the less it remained a Roman execution of a politically dangerous Jewish figure. Then came the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70. Roman forces crushed rebellion, burned the temple, and devastated the city. The catastrophe reshaped Jewish life and intensified the danger of association with anti-Roman resistance. Early Christian communities now faced a practical question. How could they survive inside the empire that executed Jesus and destroyed Jerusalem? If they presented Jesus primarily as a Jewish messianic claimant opposed to Roman power, the movement could be treated as politically subversive. To expand across the empire, Christianity needed to reinterpret its founder in a form that was less threatening to Rome and more understandable to Roman culture. This did not happen instantly. It unfolded over generations. Responsibility for the death of Jesus gradually shifted away from Roman authority and toward Jewish opponents within the gospel narratives. Pilate, the Roman governor, was increasingly portrayed as reluctant. The crowd became increasingly responsible. The political meaning of crucifixion faded, while theological explanations expanded. Jesus ceased to appear primarily as a man executed by empire. He became a heavenly savior whose death occurred according to a divine plan. This change protected the movement. A political revolutionary threatened Caesar. A spiritual redeemer can coexist with Caesar. A teacher announcing justice on earth is dangerous. A divine figure offering salvation after death can be tolerated, especially if his followers obey civil authority. The virgin birth fits within this transformation. Roman culture already contained stories of rulers and heroes connected to gods. Divine ancestry was a familiar language of greatness. Augustus and other emperors were surrounded by claims of supernatural favor and sacred origin. To describe Jesus as divinely conceived placed him within a symbolic category the Roman world recognized. It also changed the nature of his kingship. He was no longer merely another human claimant to Israel's throne. He was a heavenly Son of God. His kingdom could be presented as spiritual rather than political. His followers could insist that he did not compete directly with Caesar. This was theological camouflage. It allowed a movement born around a crucified Jewish man to survive inside the empire that killed him. Yet survival came at a cost. The more divine Jesus became, the more the human Jesus disappeared. The man who felt hunger became an icon untouched by ordinary weakness. The teacher who developed within history became an eternal being who merely appeared inside it. The person who could be followed became a supernatural exception who could only be worshipped. This distance produced dependence. If Jesus is human, his insight may reveal what humanity can become. If Jesus is God by nature, his perfection becomes inaccessible. You may admire him. You may kneel before him. You may ask for forgiveness. But you cannot become what he is. An unbridgeable gap opens between the believer and the object of belief. And once that gap exists, someone must mediate it. An institution, a priesthood, a system of authorized doctrine, a hierarchy claiming the right to explain God to humanity. The movement that began among the poor could now become an instrument of power. But this transformation was not complete until theology received imperial enforcement. That moment arrived 3 centuries later, not in a village, but in a council chamber, not beneath a star, but beneath the authority of an emperor. In the year 325, bishops gathered at Nicaea, and there, the nature of Jesus became a matter of political order. By the beginning of the 4th century, Christianity had grown from a persecuted movement into a force that could no longer be ignored. It had spread across cities, social classes, and regions, but it was not united. Different communities held different beliefs about Jesus. Some regarded him as a human prophet, uniquely chosen by God. Some believed he became divine at baptism. Some believed he was elevated after resurrection. Some described him as a heavenly being subordinate to the Father. Others argued that he was fully divine and equal with God. These differences were not minor philosophical details. They shaped worship. They determined who could speak for God. They influenced how salvation was understood. They created rival bishops, rival communities, and rival claims to truth. For Emperor Constantine, theological conflict had political consequences. An empire weakened by internal division needed unity. Christianity could become a powerful source of shared identity, but only if Christianity itself could be unified. Constantine therefore summoned bishops to Nicaea in 325. Later tradition often presents the council as a purely spiritual gathering guided only by divine truth. But the council also occurred under imperial sponsorship. The emperor did not call it because he had become a detached philosopher, interested in the deepest mysteries of existence. He needed stability. Religious unity could support political unity. The central dispute concerned the relationship between Jesus and God the Father. Was the Son created? Had he come into existence at some point? Was he divine in a secondary sense? Or had he existed eternally, sharing the same essence as the Father? The language eventually adopted declared the Son to be of the same substance as the Father. This formula became a foundation of Orthodox Christianity. But the process by which it became official was human. Bishops argued. Positions competed. Political alliances mattered. Imperial pressure existed. A creed was formulated. Opposing views were condemned. The result was not merely theological agreement. It became enforceable orthodoxy. This does not automatically prove the doctrine false. Human beings must use language, councils, and debate whenever they attempt to define abstract ideas. But it destroys the illusion that doctrine entered the world untouched by politics. The official nature of Christ was established through institutions operating within history. Once imperial authority supported one position, theology acquired the force of law. Books connected to rejected views could disappear. Teachers could be exiled. Communities could be declared heretical. The winners preserved their texts, trained future clergy, and defined how later generations understood the past. History often appears unanimous only after alternative voices have been silenced. The Council did not invent every Christian belief in a single moment. Ideas about divinity existed long before Nicaea, but Nicaea helped transform debate into official structure. The divine Christ became inseparable from imperial order. The human Jesus became increasingly difficult to recover beneath layers of doctrine, ceremony, and political usefulness. The man who challenged power was represented in gold. The teacher who walked among fishermen appeared in imperial basilicas. The person executed as a threat to Rome became a sacred figure used to legitimize rulers. This reversal is one of history's deepest ironies. The empire did not merely defeat the movement, it absorbed it. And once absorbed, Christianity could govern not only behavior but imagination. Theological control is more powerful than physical control because it enters the person's understanding of themselves. Tell people that they are born corrupted. Tell them their natural condition is guilt. Tell them their own reason is unreliable. Tell them salvation depends upon accepting doctrines they are forbidden to examine. Tell them that rejection by the institution may mean rejection by God. Fear will begin enforcing obedience from within. No guard is required. The believer becomes their own guard. This is where Spinoza's criticism becomes more than historical analysis. He saw how religious systems could transform uncertainty into dependence. A person who believes they are fundamentally broken will search for an authority claiming the power to repair them. A person who fears eternal punishment will surrender questions that would otherwise seem reasonable. A person taught that doubt is sinful will experience anxiety before investigation even begins. The institution does not need to answer every contradiction. It only needs to make questioning emotionally dangerous. The gap between Jesus and humanity becomes central to this structure. If Jesus is God by nature and you are corrupted by nature, then you cannot approach the divine directly. You require mediation. The institution becomes the bridge. It administers the sacraments. It defines correct belief. It controls interpretation. It decides who belongs. It identifies who must be excluded. The message is subtle but powerful. Truth is not something you can discover. Truth is something you must receive from those authorized to deliver it. Spinoza rejected this structure. For him, truth could not depend upon authority. A proposition did not become true because a priest declared it, a council voted for it, or an emperor enforced it. Truth revealed itself through clarity, logical necessity, and adequate understanding. This threatened every institution built upon mystery because understanding reduces dependency. When people understand the causes of their fear, fear loses some of its power. When they understand how doctrines developed, doctrines no longer appear outside history. When they recognize that sacred texts contain conflicting voices, they begin reading rather than merely obeying. This was why Spinoza was dangerous. He did not simply reject one doctrine. He challenged the mechanism through which doctrine governs the mind, and he paid for that challenge long before his analysis of Christianity reached the wider world. His own community condemned him. His family ties were broken. His name became associated with betrayal. The man who argued that understanding brings freedom was forced to discover whether he could live without belonging. To see the depth of his answer, return to Amsterdam. It is the 27th of July, 1656. The leaders of the Portuguese Jewish community are preparing to erase a 23-year-old man from their world. The Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam had been formed by people carrying the memory of persecution. Many families had fled the Iberian Peninsula, where Jews had faced forced conversion, surveillance, punishment, and expulsion. They had rebuilt their lives in a comparatively safer city. Their community provided more than worship. It provided identity, language, marriage, education, business connections, protection, belonging. Within such a community, unity was not merely a theological preference. It was connected to survival. This helps explain the severity of the reaction to Spinoza. His questions about scripture, prophecy, divine law, and the nature of God did not appear as private intellectual curiosity. They appeared to threaten the structure that held the community together. On the 27th of July, 1656, a formal sherem was pronounced against him. He was only 23. The language of the condemnation was severe. He was cursed by day and by night, cursed when he lay down and when he rose, cursed when he went out and when he returned. Members of the community were forbidden to speak with him, read his writings, or stand near him. The purpose was complete separation. Spinoza was not simply told that his ideas were wrong. He was removed from the social world that had given him identity. Imagine the emotional force of such exclusion. The people who knew your childhood no longer greet you. Friends avoid your eyes. Relatives fear being seen near you. Your name is spoken as a warning. You are treated not as a mistaken person but as a source of contamination. Most human beings will surrender almost any intellectual conviction to avoid such isolation. We often imagine that people believe because evidence has persuaded them. But belonging shapes belief more deeply than we admit. A doctrine may survive not because it is clear, but because questioning it threatens family, status, marriage, work, and love. The cost of doubt becomes greater than the discomfort of contradiction. Spinoza chose the contradiction. He did not return, begging to be restored. He did not pretend belief in exchange for acceptance. He walked away. He spent the remainder of his life in modest rooms, earning money through lens grinding and writing philosophy with extraordinary discipline. He refused prestigious positions that might compromise his independence. He lived quietly. He possessed little. He died young. But within that outwardly limited life, he developed one of the most radical conceptions of freedom in Western philosophy. At the center of his thought stood the phrase Deus Sive Natura, God or nature. For Spinoza, God was not an invisible monarch standing outside the universe. God was not a human-like ruler with anger, preferences, changing moods, and a desire for praise. Such a being would simply be a larger human personality. An infinite reality could not stand outside existence, because there could be nothing outside infinity. Everything that exists must exist within the one infinite order. God is not separate from nature. God is the infinite reality expressed through nature. This does not mean that a tree or stone is individually the whole of God. It means that everything exists as a mode or expression within the same infinite substance. Human beings are not exceptions. Our minds and bodies belong to nature. Our emotions arise from causes. Our decisions emerge from conditions. Our sense of independence is often greater than our actual understanding. This is where Spinoza challenged the ordinary idea of free will. People believe they are free because they are conscious of their desires, but they are usually unaware of the causes that produce those desires. You decide to seek approval and call it a choice, but perhaps years of rejection shaped the need. You become angry and call the anger justified, but perhaps fear, memory, pride, exhaustion, and expectation formed the reaction before you became conscious of it. You cling to a belief and call it faith, but perhaps the terror of exclusion makes disbelief emotionally impossible. We experience the effect and ignore the chain of causes. Spinoza compared this condition to an object in motion that, if conscious, might imagine it moved by its own decision. A stone thrown through the air would feel its movement but not understand the hand or force behind it. Human beings often resemble that imagined stone. We know what we want. We do not know why we want it. Freedom, then, cannot mean acting without causes. Nothing exists without causes. Freedom means becoming more active through understanding. The more adequately you understand what shapes you, the less blindly you are governed by it. Consider jealousy. When jealousy arises, it presents itself as truth. It tells you that another person threatens your worth. It demands suspicion, control, and anger. But when you examine its causes, you may discover insecurity, fear of abandonment, past betrayal, or dependence upon another person's approval. The emotion does not disappear immediately, but it changes. It becomes an object of understanding rather than an unquestionable command. That change is freedom. The same applies to religious fear. A person may fear punishment for questioning doctrine. The fear feels supernatural, but its causes may be found in childhood conditioning, social pressure, repetition, and the imagination of authority. Understanding does not insult the person. It releases them from confusing emotional inheritance with eternal truth. Spinoza believed that superstition grows where fear and uncertainty dominate. People desire control over events they cannot predict. They search for signs. They interpret accidents as messages. They imagine disasters as punishment. Religious authorities can exploit this instability by claiming exclusive knowledge of divine intention. Spinoza offered no comforting cosmic parent who rearranges reality according to prayer. He offered something more severe, reality governed by necessity. But within that severity existed peace. If nature is not a personal enemy, misfortune is not a divine insult. If events arise from causes, suffering can be examined rather than mythologized. If God is reality itself, seeking understanding becomes a form of spiritual participation. You do not honor truth by shutting down the mind. You honor truth by using it. This is why Spinoza could lose community and still become inwardly free. He had traded the comfort of accepted illusion for the loneliness of understanding. But the final question is not whether we admire him. The final question is whether we are willing to apply the same courage to ourselves. You may have listened this far while feeling two opposing forces inside you. One part of you wants clarity. Another part wants safety. One part recognizes the contradictions. Another part fears what recognition may cost. This conflict is not accidental. Beliefs formed in childhood are not stored only as ideas. They are connected to emotion, family, identity, memory, and survival. You may remember the voice of a parent warning that doubt leads to destruction. You may remember a preacher describing eternal punishment. You may remember being told that obedience proves goodness and questioning reveals pride. Long before you possess the knowledge necessary to evaluate such claims, your nervous system learned to associate inquiry with danger. This is why religious doubt can feel physically painful. The body reacts before reason finishes the question. Spinoza offers a difficult but liberating possibility. The discomfort may not prove that the question is wrong. It may prove that the conditioning is deep. Fear is not always evidence of danger. Sometimes fear is the emotional shadow of an old command. This does not mean every religious belief is false. It means no belief should be protected from examination merely because examination produces anxiety. If God is truth, truth cannot be harmed by honest investigation. If a doctrine collapses when questioned, perhaps the question was not the problem. A rational mind cannot be a divine gift in science and a sinful instrument in theology. The same intelligence that measures the movement of planets, studies the human body, and discovers the laws of nature cannot suddenly become corrupt the moment it compares two sacred texts. That contradiction reveals the interest of authority. Institutions praise reason when reason serves them, and condemn it when reason examines them. Spinoza refused this division. To him, understanding reality was not an attack on God. It was the closest thing to worship. The mind is a lens, but the lens is rarely clear. It is scratched by fear, clouded by inherited assumptions, bent by desire, distorted by authority, covered by guilt. The task is not to destroy the lens. The task is to polish it. To polish the lens means asking where your beliefs came from. It means separating emotional certainty from logical evidence. It means examining whether a doctrine creates understanding or dependence. It means recognizing when fear has been given a sacred name. It means refusing to lie to yourself merely to remain accepted. This brings us back to Jesus. If Jesus was a human being born within history, rather than a supernatural exception placed above it, would that make him less worthy of attention? Or would it make his life more powerful? A God who acts courageously is not surprising. A human being who confronts empire despite fear is extraordinary. A divine being who forgives enemies risks nothing. A human being who refuses hatred while suffering reveals a possibility within humanity. A supernatural figure can remain distant. A human teacher enters your own world. Perhaps this is why institutions needed him to be unreachable. An unreachable Jesus can be worshipped without being followed. He can be placed above an altar while his teachings are ignored. His image can bless armies, empires, and systems of wealth he may have challenged. His name can be used by rulers while his concern for the poor is forgotten. But a human Jesus is more dangerous. He asks what you will do. He removes the excuse that goodness belongs only to divine beings. He turns compassion, courage, justice, and truth into human responsibilities. The purpose of this inquiry is not to replace one rigid doctrine with another. It is not to command you to reject everything your ancestors believed. Your ancestors lived within the limits of their information. Many held faith because faith gave them strength under conditions of suffering. They used the language available to them. To honor them does not mean repeating every conclusion they inherited. It means continuing the search they could not finish. They walked as far as their world allowed. You stand at another point in the journey. You possess access to historical research, competing interpretations, ancient texts, and forms of knowledge unavailable to most previous generations. This access creates responsibility. Will you use new information only to defend old conclusions? Or will you allow understanding to transform you? Imagine Spinoza one final time. He sits alone in a cold room. His hands are covered with fine dust. Before him lies a lens he has worked upon for hours. He lifts it toward the candle. At first, the flame bends. A flaw in the glass divides the light. He lowers the lens and returns to the work. He does not become angry with the glass. He does not demand that the distortion disappear through belief. He polishes, patiently, carefully, again and again. Then he rises the lens. The flame becomes clearer. This is the image of intellectual freedom. Freedom is not the dramatic declaration that nothing influences you. Freedom is the gradual recognition of what influences you. It is the movement from passive reaction toward active understanding. It is the ability to feel fear without obeying it, to experience anger without becoming identical to it, to carry inherited belief without being imprisoned by it, to stand within nature without demanding that nature revolve around personal expectation. Spinoza's God does not require humiliation. Reality does not demand that you call yourself broken. You are finite. You are limited. You are shaped by causes you did not choose. But you are also capable of understanding more of those causes, and every increase in understanding enlarges the space in which you can act. You were never separate from the infinite order of existence. You are not a stranger placed into nature. You are nature becoming aware of itself through a temporary human form. Like a wave, you appear distinct without being separate from the ocean. Like a whirlpool, you possess a recognizable shape while remaining inseparable from the river that forms you. Like a musical note, you have your own character while existing within a composition larger than you can hear. This does not make your life meaningless. It gives your life context. Your freedom does not consist in escaping the whole. It consists in understanding your place within it. So examine the beliefs you were forbidden to examine. Ask why they frighten you. Ask who benefits from your fear. Ask whether guilt has been mistaken for conscience. Ask whether obedience has been mistaken for virtue. Ask whether certainty has been mistaken for truth. Ask whether you are defending reality or merely defending an identity built around inherited ideas. And then ask the most difficult question of all. Would you rather be loved for repeating what you do not believe, or rejected while remaining honest about what you see? Spinoza chose honesty. It cost him community, comfort, and security. But it gave him something authority could not offer, a mind that belonged to him. That is the invitation. Not to destroy faith for the pleasure of destruction, not to replace religion with arrogance, not to pretend that reason has answered every mystery. The invitation is to seek a peace that does not require self-deception, a peace that does not collapse when questioned, a peace rooted in understanding rather than fear. If this message has opened something in you, write one word in the comments: freedom. Write it not as a slogan, but as a commitment to examine your life more honestly. Share this with someone who has carried religious guilt for too long. Perhaps they do not need another answer. Perhaps they need permission to ask the question they have been afraid to speak. Spinoza died in 1677. But every time a human being chooses understanding over superstition, clarity over manipulation, and truth over comfortable illusion, his work continues. Keep polishing the lens. Keep examining the causes. Keep questioning without hatred. Keep seeking without fear. Truth does not need protection from your mind. Truth is waiting for you to see it.